Hi folks, thanks for joining me here today back at the wood shop. Now the cherry we'll be working with today has been up in the loft of the barn for about 10 to 15 years, and it is plain sawn, not quarter sawn, but that interesting grain will make some very interesting shaker style boxes. So come on along with me. I've marked this piece of wood to cut off at 34 inches. Once I get beyond that, I get into a little trouble with a knot and some grain run out, but I only need about 32 to make the tall number 5 shaker style carriers that I'd like to make today. So we'll go ahead and cut that off at about 34. The piece of wood we're working with today has been rough sawn from the Amish sawmill down the road, and it needs planed down. It needs smoothed out. So we're going to put it through the DeWalt thickness planer a few times and clean it up. I have that board that we just planed in the vise over here at the bench, and you can see the edges of the board are still rough cut. And also, that edge isn't straight. If I put the straight edge up on there, you'll notice that I can rock it back and forth, and there's air coming or light coming under at each side. That means that that board is bowed here in the middle, but I can easily take that bow out with a little Stanley 78 that I have here. Now that I have that one edge cleaned up, I can move over to the table saw, set my fence, and clean up that other edge. I'll use a push stick and a feather board here to keep my fingers away from the saw blade. Whenever you're using the table saw, you need to be cautious of kickback. In order to keep that from happening, you need to have pressure in toward the fence, through and down, and you need to be working with boards that don't have bows or kinks in them. So I'll be okay here. This is a nice wide board, and I'll use some things to help me out. You'll notice that I got some burning on the edge of that board. That's an indication that my saw blade needs sharpened and cleaned. And I will do that before I move on. That's the first that showed up here on the cherry. I've been cutting some pine with it, and the pine pitch may have added to that problem a little bit. But it won't make a difference today in what we're going to do. Now I'm over at the bandsaw, the resaw bandsaw, and the next step will be to go ahead and resaw this 1-inch wide board down into narrow pieces to make the bentwood boxes with. The finished thickness I'm looking for is about 0.09 of an inch, so that's less than 1/10 of an inch. And the setup I have is, instead of a feather board, I use a box clamped down just before the beginning of the blade there, and I have my fence set to the proper thickness. I'll show you a look at that from the back end also. Here's another look at that setup. That box serves to keep the board flush against the fence as I'm pushing it through there. And I'll have to finish off my cut with a push stick like you see there laying on the left-hand side. So here we go. Now, between each successive slice that I take off with the bandsaw, I'll come back over to the planer here and I'll run the original board through the planer to go ahead and true up and take any saw marks off of that side that I've just sawed. I've already done a couple of pieces. Here they are, and you can see that this side has the saw marks from the bandsaw in it, and this side, because after each cut I run it back through the planer, this side does not have any saw marks. So that leaves us half the work to do in the next step. The next step in the process is to go ahead and feed those thin strips that we cut on the bandsaw through the thickness sander. That'll take off the saw marks left on that one side, and it'll also get us down to the thickness that we want. Now here's those boards I'm going to send through, and you can see some of those marks that need to come off. If I was making small boxes, I'd run that wood through on a shooting board, which is just a board of very straight hard material that's been covered with sandpaper that I could put my thin strips on top and run them through. That would give me some extra clearance between the sanding belt on the machine and the feed belt. When you get down to about 1/16 of an inch, you need to do that to keep the sanding belt from damaging the feed belt. But we're not down there with this big number 5 box. We're only heading for about 0.09 of an inch, just under 1/10. We're not down to 1/16. So let's go ahead and get started and run a couple boards through here. At this point in time, I usually check to see how I'm doing. Remember, I'm shooting for about 0.090. So here I have my micrometer, and we'll put it on. I'm about 0.095. I'm really close. And this particular board and its mate that I made here with you this morning, they both need to be sanded a little bit just with my battery operated palm sander. They've been sanded with 80 grit. I'll go with 150 and then 220 before I even try to bend it, and I'll be right down in that area that I need to be. And I really think these are going to turn out to be some nice looking tall number 5 boxes. Well folks, I know lately it's become more difficult for bentwood box makers, shaker box makers, to find bands that have already been prepared and are ready to bend. So I thought that that would be helpful if you all saw what I'm doing, at least to make bands ahead of time out of my own lumber from the Amish sawmill down the road. Thanks for watching. See you next time.